The name she kept. Catherine Reyes had spent 6 years building a career on the interstellar circuit before she ever set foot on Kesh Prime, and none of those 6 years had prepared her for the particular way a room full of Cation nobles went quiet when she finished a set. Not applause, not yet, just a long, assessing silence, like something being priced. She sang anyway. That was the job. The Gilded Hollow paid better than any venue on the human circuit, and the promoter who'd booked her, a smooth, unplaceable man named Doran, who worked for a company registered 4 shells deep and untraceable past the third, had promised full assembly security clearance and a contract that read, on paper, like every other tour stop she'd played in 11 years of doing this for a living. "You have a gift," the Cation who ran the Hollow's private floor told her after her third night, his voice pitched low, his 4-jointed hands folded with an unhurried patience that should have told her more than it did. A gift like that shouldn't only belong to a stage. "It belongs to whoever's paying for the ticket," Catherine said, smiling the practiced smile that had gotten her through 11 years of men who thought a stage was an invitation. That's the whole business model. She should have left after that conversation. She told herself, later in the dark, with far too much time to think about it, that some part of her had known and stayed anyway, because the money was good, and Doran kept saying 1 more week, and by the time she understood what the private floor actually was, the doors that led back out to the public venue had already, quietly, stopped opening for her. They took her on the 4th week, after a set that ended, for the last time, in genuine applause. The compound they called the Hollow, the real one, not the venue that wore its name as a mask, was carved into a cliff face 200 miles from the nearest city, older than the crime syndicate that currently used it, older than the Assembly's first survey of Kesh Prime. Catherine was brought in with 9 others, most of them barely conscious, all of them fitted with the same rough gray intake tags around their wrists, a Kesh trafficking custom, she'd learn later, meant to track which captive belonged to which buyer, so the right person reached the right auction. The woman in the corner was already dying. Catherine could see that clearly, even in the near dark. The shallow, irregular breathing, the gray pallor under skin that had once, maybe, looked something like Catherine's own. "A dancer," one of the other captives murmured. Taken from a different venue 3 tiers up the coast, injured badly enough in the taking that the buyers had already quietly written her off. Catherine spent those first days doing the only thing she had left to do, listening. She listened to handlers talk amongst themselves, half in boredom, half in the particular cruelty of people who'd stopped seeing captives as anything but inventory. She learned the intake tags weren't cross-checked against faces, only against a manifest, updated by a clerk too overworked to look closely at who wore what. She learned the compound's watch rotation had a gap, 6 minutes long, right after the outer patrol changed shift. She learned all of this not because she had a plan yet, but because 11 years of reading a room for a living had taught her that information was the only currency that never ran out, even here. The plan itself came to her on the 3rd night, watching the dying dancer's chest rise and fall in that same shallow, failing rhythm, and it arrived with a kind of terrible clarity she wasn't proud of and couldn't unthink once it had. She traded tags with the dying woman during that 6-minute gap on the 4th night. "Why?" the dancer rasped when she understood what Catherine was doing. "Why would you—" "Because you're going to die either way," Catherine said quietly, fitting the tag around the woman's wrist, taking the woman's onto her own. "And because I have a sister back home who needs to believe I tried to come back to her. That's not a lie if it's still true when the manifest says the wrong name died." The dancer didn't have the strength to argue. Catherine was never sure, afterward, whether what passed over her face was gratitude or simple confusion at being spared the indignity of dying as cargo one last time, dying instead wearing the name of a woman the buyers had actually wanted. 2 days later, when the dancer's body finally gave out on its own in the night, the handlers logged it under Catherine's real name and burned it before dawn, the way they burned anything that had stopped being worth cataloging. Word went out through the same broker network that had sold the tickets to Catherine's own last show. The human singer had died resisting transport. Doran, 4 shells deep in a company that would never answer for it, closed the file and never once had to explain why his security clearance had been worth exactly nothing. What Catherine hadn't planned for, in the 2 days she'd had to plan anything at all, was what came after. A dead woman's name didn't get her released. It got her forgotten, filed away as unclaimed inventory in a system that no longer had a reason to track her, since the one entry that mattered had already been marked sold and settled. Handlers stopped bringing meals to her cell on schedule. She was moved, twice, deeper into the compound's underlevels to make room for captives whose paperwork still had buyers attached to it. She survived the first year on scraps and on the same stubborn instinct that had gotten her through 11 years of reading rooms and reading men. Find the pattern, and the pattern will eventually give you an opening. She mapped the underlevels in her head, cell by cell, patrol by patrol, the way she'd once mapped a set list to a room's changing mood, because it was the only thing that kept the dark from closing all the way over her. In the second year, she found a gap in a ventilation shaft that ran beneath the lowest tier, barely wide enough for a starved woman to fit through, which by then, she was. She didn't run. Running, she'd decided, was how you got caught by something with a name and a face on record. Instead, she went sideways into the maze of disused service tunnels beneath the compound that no one had walked in a generation, and she became, in the truest sense, no one at all. A rumor the underlevel handlers occasionally traded over drinks, a ghost blamed for missing rations, a shape seen once at the edge of a torch beam and never confirmed again. She lived that way for 4 years. She ate what she could take without being seen. She learned the tunnels better than the men who were paid to guard them. And every single day, in the parts of her mind she couldn't starve into silence, she thought about her sister and hoped, with a kind of desperate, illogical faith she'd never admit to anyone, that somehow, impossibly, Ava had not been told, or had not believed it, or had found some way to keep living anyway. She had no way of knowing that 4 light-years away, in a walk-up apartment in Chicago, Ava had believed it completely, and it had broken something in her that would never quite set the same way twice. Ava Reyes was closing out a double shift at the gym she managed when the 2 agency officers came through the front doors, and some animal part of her brain knew before either of them said a word, knew from the way they walked, slow and heavy, like people carrying something they didn't want to set down. She wiped her hands on a towel and stepped out to meet them, and some smaller, stupider part of her kept hoping, right up until the older one reached up and took off his cap, that this was about a permit, a wrong address. Anything at all besides what it turned out to be. Ms. Reyes. The cap came off. That was the detail that would stay with Ava forever after. Not the words, not even the woman's face. Just the cap coming off, slow and formal, like some kind of ritual the touring agency trained its liaisons to perform. Your sister's engagement on Kesh Prime ended in an incident during transport. I'm very sorry to tell you. Ava didn't hear the rest of it as words. She heard it as a sound, a low roaring that started in her ears and didn't stop for 3 days. Somewhere underneath the roaring, a memory surfaced without being asked for. Catherine on the phone 6 weeks earlier, soundcheck noise in the background saying, "I'll call you the second the tour wraps. Don't wait up," in the same easy voice she'd used 100 times before, because there had been no reason, that day, for either of them to think it might be the last time she said it. Catherine was the brave one. Catherine was the one who'd gotten on a shuttle at 19 with a guitar and a duffel bag, and never once looked back at Chicago, who called their mother every Sunday from wherever the tour had landed, who'd sat by Ava's hospital bed for 11 straight hours after the accident that took their father and nearly took Ava too, holding her hand through 2 surgeries and never once leaving to sleep or eat or do anything but be there when Ava opened her eyes. Catherine was supposed to be the one who always came home, because Catherine was too good at reading a room, too careful under all that reckless shine, too smart to die on some rock 40 light-years from anyone who loved her. That was the deal, as far as Ava had always understood it, unspoken but absolute. Catherine went out into the world and came back with stories. Nothing was supposed to be able to keep her from coming back. Ava stood in the gym's empty lobby for a long time after the officers left, towel still balled in one fist, and felt something in herself go very quiet and very cold, like a house with the power cut. She didn't cry. Not that night. She went to the gym's back room and started stripping down a heavy bag that didn't need it, methodically, one seam at a time, because her hands needed something to do or they were going to start shaking and not stop. Somewhere in the third hour of it, she realized she wasn't grieving anymore. She was planning. The first year, she told herself it was research. She read everything the touring agency would release about the incident, which wasn't much. What she couldn't get through official channels, she went looking for through a woman named Renata Cole, a former booking security liaison who'd resigned 2 months after Catherine's tour went out. Quietly, no public statement, and who agreed to meet Ava in a diner outside Cicero only after Ava had sent her the same 3 words, unsigned, 4 separate times. I know why. She didn't, as it turned out. Not exactly, but she knew enough to matter. She'd flagged the Gilded Hollows promoter during vetting, an unregistered fourth shell company, no verifiable venue insurance, a booking contract with clauses she'd never seen attached to a legitimate tour stop, and watched the agency strip her recommendation out of the file before it ever reached Catherine's contract, because a cleared venue meant a bigger cut, and nobody above her wanted the paperwork to say she'd been right. When the incident report came back marked unfortunate but unavoidable, she'd read it twice, cleaned out her desk, and hadn't slept a full night since. "I'm not telling you this to make you feel better," she told Ava, across a diner table neither of them had touched food at. "I'm telling you because you're going to go anyway, and I'd rather you go with something real than with rage and a gun. You can't get past customs." She had contacts left over from the booking years. Thin ones, deniable ones, the kind that existed in the specific gray space between colleague and asset, and over the following months, she turned them, one careful conversation at a time, into something usable, an outdated but real layout of the Hollow's actual compound, a name inside Kesh Prime's underworld worth paying attention to, a rough map of which syndicate crews actually held power inside the operation, versus who merely fronted it. The second year, research became preparation. Ava sold the gym first. Too many mornings walking in expecting to see her sister's face on the community board where Catherine's tour posters used to go up. Then the car their father had left her. Then everything she owned that wasn't strictly necessary for the one purpose it now all served, which was funding a route off-world that didn't run through any checkpoint, that would ask why a civilian wanted passage to a system still flagged for organized trafficking activity. She found her second recruit 2 towns over, Walt Ferris, a retired Marine gunnery sergeant who ran a failing gun range out of a converted barn and drank exactly enough every night to make it to morning. Walt had lost a daughter to a trafficking ring working the same outer strata circuit 3 years back. 19 years old, gone during what the report called a routine transport delay, a case the agency had quietly closed for lack of jurisdiction before anyone bothered to actually look. Walt had spent 3 years knowing exactly how little anyone with real power was ever going to do about it. "You want me to teach you how to kill people," Walt said, the first night Ava showed up at the range with Catherine's photograph and no good explanation. "I want you to teach me how to survive killing them," Ava said. "I already know I'm going to try." Walt looked at her for a long time. Then he pulled a second folding chair up to the workbench and said, "Sit down. We're doing this right, or we're not doing it." Ava showed up every single day for 6 months. She broke 2 knuckles in the first month and didn't miss a session. By the 3rd month, Walt had stopped correcting her form and started running her through close-quarters drills with the specific brutal patience of a man teaching someone he intended to keep alive. By the 6th month, Walt didn't say it in so many words, but Ava understood, the way you understand weather changing, that Walt was coming with her. "Somebody's got to keep you from getting yourself killed before you get where you're going," Walt said, when Ava finally asked him outright, And somebody owes that outfit a debt anyway. Might as well be the same somebody. The third year, Ava trained with blades alongside the guns, because a firearm would flag every checkpoint between Earth and the outer transit stations. And because Walt insisted a blade taught you something, a gun never would. How close you had to be willing to get to another human being to end them. Ava learned to move through a room the way water moves through a cracked pipe, finding every gap, never stopping long enough to be caught in one place. She learned to kill quietly, which was a different skill entirely from killing at all, and a much uglier one to actually practice, and she learned it without flinching, because flinching, Walt told her flatly, was how you ended up the one on the ground. Their mother died that year. Pneumonia, quick, almost merciful in how little time it gave anyone to dread it. Ava sat with her the last week and never once told her what she'd become or what she was building toward, because some part of her still wanted their mother to die, believing her surviving daughter was going to be all right. She told herself, standing over the grave beside the empty plot they'd kept for Catherine, a headstone with no body under it, a date of death with a question mark quietly implied, that this was the last soft thing she owed anyone. After this, there'd be nothing left in her to spend on gentleness. Renata came to the funeral. She stood at the back, didn't approach, didn't need to. Afterward, in the parking lot, she told Ava she'd found their way in. "There's a man on the Kesh Prime underworld circuit named Vren," she said. "Used to run intake logistics for the Hollow's underlevels. Got broken down to nothing 8 years ago over a captive who disappeared on his watch, some performer, officially recorded as dead in transit, except the body burned before anyone with real authority could confirm whose it actually was. His own bosses didn't kill him for the mistake. They did something a Cation crew considers worse. They cut him out of every job that mattered and let him keep breathing in a city that no longer sees him. He's been selling information about the Hollow security for 8 years, waiting for a way to matter again. I think he'd sell us a great deal more than information if the price was a warden who could no longer humiliate him." Ava didn't know, standing in that parking lot, that the captive Wren had lost 8 years ago wore a dead dancer's stolen tag into a burn pit, and that the ghost his own crews still muttered about in underlevel bars was the only reason there was still, technically, a version of Catherine Reyes left alive to find. Nobody told her. Nobody could have. It was simply true, sitting there underneath everything else that was true, waiting. The fourth year, they left. Renata's forged clearances, built from real booking industry templates instead of black market guesswork, got all 3 of them as far as a transit station on the edge of Kesh space, where they switched to a freighter crewed by people who didn't ask why 2 humans and a woman who moved like she used to be industry security wanted quiet passage to a system still nominally hostile to unlicensed travel. Ava didn't look back at the ship once it broke atmosphere, and Earth's blue curve fell away behind her for what she assumed, privately, would be the last time. She'd stopped, somewhere in the 3rd year, planning past the moment she'd reach the man who gave the order. Everything after that was fog she didn't need to see through yet. The Hollow hadn't changed in 4 years. The cliff face still clawed at a sky the wrong color. The same eyes still watched from the venue's private floor. The mask the operation wore for anyone who bought a ticket. Ava walked through the outer markets in a courier's coat, blades in each boot. Walt a half step behind her doing the same. Renata ahead of them both, already gone to find Vren in the Undercity bar, where he still nursed the same drink every night, waiting for someone worth selling his hatred to. Vren was smaller than Ava expected, and harder. A Keshan she suspected Catherine would have recognized instantly. All sharp economical menace, but bent now under 8 years of being made to feel small in a city that once feared him. He looked at the 3 of them for a long moment before he spoke. "You want the warden dead," he said, in flat, accented assembly standard. "Half this operation wants the warden dead. His purges of anyone who questions him have eaten 3 crews in 5 years, and the 4th is only waiting to see who else will move first. I can get you into the compound. I cannot promise you'll leave it." "We're not planning on leaving it clean," Walt said. "Good," Vren said. Clean was never on offer. He laid it out over 2 nights in a back room that smelled of something like rust and something like rot. The service gate still ran half-staffed at first light, same as it had 8 years ago. Some things, he said, a warden too paranoid to trust new men never bothered fixing. The compound's inner watch rotation still had the same 6-minute gap after the outer patrol changed. An old flaw, older than Vren's own service, that nobody currently working even knew was a flaw at all. And the Farron crew, one of the 4 crews still standing, had reached out through back channels of its own 3 months ago, quietly probing whether outsiders might be willing to help remove a warden before that warden finished removing the Farron crew too. The Farron crew will pull the compound's strength toward the coastal landing 3 miles east tonight, Vren said. A staged cargo dispute, nothing that will hold past dawn, but it will hold long enough. Most of the warden's muscle will be committed there before your gate ever opens. What's left behind will be old hands, junior watchers, and the warden's own personal floor. That is the only version of this that does not end with all of you dead in the first corridor. And after, Renata said. If it works. The Farron crew takes the operation. I take my name back. Or whatever is left of it worth taking. Vren's mouth did something that wasn't quite a smile. You take whatever it is you actually came for. I have never asked what that is. I find I do not need to. They went in through the service gate on the 3rd night. An hour before the Farron crew's stage dispute was time to break the eastern landing wide open. The first 2 watchers at the gate died fast and quiet. Walt's hands, not Ava's, a blade across a throat and a palm clamped hard over the sound before it could finish leaving the man's mouth. Ava had trained for this for 3 years, and it still hit her like a physical blow. The specific wet finality of it. The way a person simply stopped being a person and became weight in Walt's arms, lowered to the ground instead of dropped, because even now, even here, Walt didn't waste a body's fall to noise. Inside, it stopped being quiet almost immediately. The eastern diversion was supposed to buy them the whole compound's attention. It bought them most of it, not all of it. A junior handler making rounds 2 floors up caught sight of Renata's shadow where no shadow belonged, and the alarm went up before anyone could stop it. And after that, the compound stopped being a plan and became a fight for every corridor they needed to cross. Ava killed the first man who came at her with a mistake. A wild overhead strike Walt had drilled out of her a year ago, muscle memory failing under real fear for the first time. And his blade opened her forearm to the bone before she got close enough to finish it with her hands, both of them on the floor, her thumbs finding his throat and not letting go until long after there was any reason left to hold on. She came up off the body shaking, blood that wasn't her own soaking through her sleeve, and understood, with a clarity that had nothing gentle left in it, that everything Walt had spent 3 years teaching her about controlled, efficient violence was a story people told themselves in training rooms. There was no controlled version of this. There was only doing it before it got done to you, over and over, until your hands stopped being your hands and became just another weapon you'd have to live with afterward, if living afterward turned out to be a thing that happened to you at all. They lost Renata on the 2nd floor. She went down covering the stairwell behind them. 3 watchers converging on a position Walt had told her to hold for 30 seconds and no longer. And she held it for nearly 2 minutes instead, because 30 seconds hadn't been enough, and she'd understood that faster than either of the people waiting on her had. Ava heard it happen without seeing it, a sound that would stay lodged behind her sternum for whatever remained of her life, short and final. And Walt's face when they finally doubled back and found her already gone told Ava everything she needed to know about whether there'd been time to do anything but keep moving. "Move," Walt said, voice like gravel dragged over stone, and didn't say another word about her for the rest of the night, because there wasn't a word built that would have helped either of them right then. And grief was a debt they'd both agreed, a long time ago at a gun range in Ohio farm country, to pay later or not at all. By the time anyone in the compound's command structure understood what was actually happening, not a diversion, not a cargo dispute, but a second front they hadn't accounted for, Ava and Walt had already put down 11 more men between them and were 3 floors closer to the warden's private hall than any outsider in the Hollow's history had gotten, while the compound was still, nominally, defended. They found the concierge in a side chamber, mid-negotiation, mid-sentence, mid-some other deal with some other unlucky supplier, when the doors blew inward off their hinges. "You," the concierge said, recognizing the shape of a human, even through years and a face gone hard as the cliffstone around them, "should not be able to be here." "You took my sister," Ava said. 4 years of practice should have burned the shake out of her voice completely. It hadn't, not entirely, not with Renata 2 floors below her going cold on a stairwell landing. "Catherine Reyes, singer, booked in good faith by people who trusted your operations paperwork." 3 watchers remained in the chamber, the rest already committed east, already dead, already somewhere Ava would never have to count. Walt took 2 of them without breaking stride, brutal and economical, the kind of violence that didn't leave room for anyone watching to look away in time. Ava took the 3rd herself, and it wasn't clean, and it wasn't quick. And by the time it was over, her hands weren't shaking anymore because there was nothing left in her steady enough to shake. "An unfortunate business necessity," the concierge said, backed now against cliffstone with nowhere left to retreat, 4 jointed hands spreading in something that might have been meant as placation. "The transport arrangement required—" "I don't care about your arrangement." Ava crossed the last of the floor between them. "I care that you took the only family I had left and turned her into a headline back home. I care that I buried an empty box because there wasn't enough of a story left to send back. I care that a woman who spent 2 floors of her life buying me the time to be standing here is dead on your stairs because your warden has spent years making it necessary for people like her to exist at all." "Please," the concierge said, the first time Ava would think later, if there was a later left in her to think in, that the word had probably ever left that mouth. "The order came from the warden. I only carried it out. Killing me changes nothing." "No," Ava agreed, "but it's a start." She didn't make it fast. She told herself, afterward, in the 2 or 3 clear minutes she had left to tell herself anything, that she hadn't planned to make it slow either. It simply happened that way. 4 years of rage-finding, for the first time, somewhere to actually go. The warden's private hall was the largest chamber in the compound, built to make visitors feel small beneath its vaulted stone ceiling. What remained of the warden's personal floor, 4 watchers, all of them younger than the ones already dead in the corridors behind Ava, none of them prepared for what the night had actually become, stood between the doors and the dais when Ava and Walt came through them both, together, for the last time. Walt took the first blade meant for Ava's back. Neither of them had planned it that way. There simply wasn't time, in the half-second the choice existed, for it to happen any other way. Ava felt the impact more than saw it. Walt's weight suddenly wrong beside her, a sound torn out of a man who never made sounds like that, and turned to find the gunnery sergeant already going down onto one knee, a blade buried to the hilt just under his ribs, his own hands still moving, still fighting, because 4 years of training had made stopping a harder habit to reach for than continuing. "Go," Walt said, and it came out wet, and it came out as an order, the last one he'd ever give. "Finish it. Don't you dare let this be for nothing." Ava didn't remember, afterward, exactly how the next minute went. Only pieces, the way a fight always came back to her later. The give of a wrist under her blade. The particular sound a body makes hitting stone when there's no strength left in it to soften the fall. Someone's shout cut short before it finished. When it was over, 3 watchers were dead on the floor, and the 4th had fled through a side door Ava didn't bother chasing him through, and Walt Ferris was on his back at the foot of the dais, chest working in short, wrong movements, blood pooling dark and wide beneath him on stone that had never once had to answer for anything before tonight. Walt. Ava dropped to her knees beside him, hands pressing uselessly against a wound too large for hands to matter to. Told you, Walt said, mouth full of blood, finding something that wasn't quite a smile anyway. Somebody had to keep you alive to the end of this? Didn't say it had to be me all the way through. He didn't say anything else. Ava knelt there for 3 seconds, 4, 5, some part of her screaming that this was the moment, the only moment that mattered, and another part of her, colder and older now than it had any right to be at 29, understood there was still a warden on a dais 20 feet away, and that Walt's last order had been the only order she had left the will to obey. She rose. Her hands were red past the wrist. She no longer entirely knew, or cared, whose blood that was. The warden had not moved from the dais. He'd had a lifetime of guards between himself and consequence, and none of that lifetime had prepared him for the specific silence of a woman walking toward him who had already lost everything the walk could possibly cost her. "You took my sister," Ava said, and this time her voice didn't break, because there was nothing left inside it soft enough to break. Catherine Reyes, singer, booked in good faith by people who trusted your operations paperwork. An unfortunate business necessity, the warden said, rising, his voice thin in a way it hadn't been an hour ago, before the Farron Crew's diversion had gutted his strength and a dead gunnery sergeant's blood had gone cold on his own hall's floor. The concierge's arrangement was sound. Your sister's contract permitted... I don't care what her contract permitted. Ava was already crossing the floor, and there was nothing controlled left in the way she moved, nothing Walt would have recognized from 3 years of careful drilling, only 4 years of grief with nowhere left to go but forward. I care that you took the only family I had left. I care that I buried an empty box because there wasn't enough of her left to send back. I care that I sat with my mother while she died and never told her the truth. Because I couldn't tell her that without telling her the rest of it too. I care that a man who lost his own daughter to your kind of business bled out on your floor 20 feet from here, still telling me to finish it. She killed the warden the way the whole night had gone, without cleanness, without anything that could honestly be called skill by the end of it, only the raw, ugly momentum of 4 years finally arriving somewhere. It was not fast. She did not want it to be fast. When it was over, she was on her knees on the dais, breathing in ragged tears that weren't quite sobs and weren't quite anything else either, blood on her hands that belonged to at least 4 different people, and the roaring that had driven her for 4 straight years, through the training, the blades, her mother's funeral, 40 light years of black, a woman named Renata Cole gone cold on a stairwell, a man named Walt Ferris gone cold at the foot of a dais, simply stopped. It didn't feel like victory. It didn't feel like anything she had a name for. She became aware, distantly, of a warmth spreading along her own side that had nothing to do with anyone else's blood, and looked down to find the wound she hadn't let herself notice in the last exchange with the warden's blade. Deep, low, the kind of wound a body keeps fighting through on adrenaline right up until the moment it doesn't. She pressed a hand to it. It didn't help. She understood, with the same flat clarity that had carried her through the last 4 years, that it wasn't going to. She might have stayed there, kneeling in front of an empty dais, except for what surfaced, unbidden, in the sudden quiet. Vren's voice, 2 nights ago in a room that smelled of rust. A performer, officially recorded as dead in transit, except the body burned before anyone with real authority could confirm whose it actually was. Ava hadn't understood, at the time, why that detail lodged in her chest like a splinter. She understood it now, kneeling in her own blood with whatever time she had left narrowing fast around her. Somewhere beneath this compound, there might still be someone who had once been a person named Catherine, filed away and left to rot because the paperwork on her had never quite closed. She couldn't give Walt back. She couldn't give Renata back. She had maybe minutes left to give anyone anything at all. "Every cell in the underlevels," she said, to a watch captain frozen by the doors, too shocked by the night to disobey a bleeding woman holding a dead warden's seal. "Open them, all of them, now." She didn't wait to see it done. She took the torch off the wall herself, one hand still pressed hard against her own side, and went down into the underlevels alone, because there was no one left to go with her, and because some things, in the end, a person had to finish carrying by herself. The lower levels hadn't seen daylight in centuries, and they didn't get it now. Only torchlight, unsteady in a hand that was losing more strength with every level down. Captives stumbled out of cells as the locks came open ahead of her, disoriented, weeping, some too far gone to understand freedom when it arrived. Ava didn't stop to explain herself to any of them. She didn't have the blood left to spare on explanations. She was just a dying woman with a key and 4 years of debts she was never going to finish paying, doing the only thing still within her reach before her reach ran out entirely. Cell after cell came up empty of anything she recognized. Twice she knelt by a body that had stopped moving long before she arrived and made herself check anyway, made herself be sure, her own vision starting to gray at the edges each time she stood back up. She almost didn't make it to the last row. She almost walked past the last cell at the end of it, the one nobody had bothered to lock as carefully, because nobody had expected its occupant to last much longer anyway. The shape huddled in the corner didn't stir at the torchlight the way the others had, didn't flinch, didn't blink, barely seemed to be breathing at all, and for one terrible second, Ava thought she'd found another body, one more thing she'd have to kneel beside and confirm as gone before whatever was happening to her own body finished happening. Then the shape moved. Just a hand, first, fingers curling weakly against the stone. Ava crouched anyway, the motion costing her more than it should have, and lifted the torch and looked. It took her a full 3 seconds to understand what she was looking at. 3 seconds of her mind simply refusing the information her eyes were sending it, because the face in front of her was too thin, too gray, too much like something scraped down to its last layer, to be a face she knew. And then it was. All at once, the way a picture resolves out of static. "Catherine," she said, and the name came out broken, unrecognizable even to herself. The eyes, sunken, glassy, struggling to hold focus in the torchlight, found her slowly, and something moved behind them that hadn't been there a second before. Ava. It cost her something to say it. Ava could see the effort travel visibly across what was left of her sister's face. You're not supposed to be here. Neither are you." Ava's voice broke completely, and she was already sliding down the wall beside her sister, the torch dropping from a hand that no longer had the strength to hold it, her own blood slick and warm and unstoppable now beneath her palm. "You're supposed to be dead. I buried you. I buried an empty box, and I let them lower it into the ground. And I built 4 years of my life around a door I just walked through, and there was nothing supposed to be on the other side. There wasn't supposed to be anything left of me to find you with." Catherine's hand found Ava's arm, weak, barely more than a tremor, and then found the wound beneath it, and understood, with the specific horror of a woman who had spent 4 years learning to read, exactly how much time a dying body had left. Ava, look at me. What did you do?" "What I came here to do." Ava's laugh came out as mostly breath. "Took 4 years. Took 2 people I'm not ever going to stop owing. Took most of what was left in me. But I got you back, Kat. I got you back." "You're bleeding out." Catherine's voice cracked entirely. 4 years of careful survival dissolving in a single moment into something raw and helpless. Ava, no. Stay with me. Stay awake. I need you to stay." "I know." Ava's hand found her sister's, weak now herself, both of them past the point where either grip could hold the other up. "I know what I did. I knew what it was going to cost before I got on that ship. I told myself I'd stopped caring somewhere around year 2. Her eyes found Catherine's and held there, And for just a moment, the 4 years fell away entirely, and there was only a garage in Chicago, and 2 sisters, and a debt that had never once been about vengeance at all. I lied. I never stopped caring. Not about you. Ava, you were always the brave one, Ava said, and her voice was going now too, thin and far away even to herself. Guess somebody had to come get you the reckless way. Catherine pulled her in, careful, desperate, both of them too broken to hold the other up properly and neither of them letting go anyway. And somewhere above them, in a compound gone quiet with shock and an underworld about to wake into a war for its own throne, torchlight guttered low over the last cell, in the last row, over 2 sisters finally in the same place at the same time, for exactly as long as that was going to last. Stay, Catherine whispered, the word cracking in half. Please, just stay. Ava didn't answer. Her hand was still around her sister's when the torch went out. If you enjoyed this video, press the like button, subscribe to the channel to help it grow, and leave a comment.